of the monitoring and let me start that over. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Greg Core, Director of the Monitoring and State Improvement Planning Division, the Office of Special Education Programs. And as Shoshana said, this is our April technical assistance call. It is a blistering 88 degrees here in Washington today, which is kind of mind-blowing for, what is it, April 13th. Really, really hot, very early in the year. Speaking of hot, we've got some hot topics for you today. We're going to start off by talking about the GEPA Section 427 form that we've been discussing with you over the past several weeks. We'll provide some more information about that and subgranting. And then the second half of the call will be kind of a preliminary look at the SPP APR clarification process. I know the Part C pre-clarification responses were sent out earlier this week, and Part B is about to be sent out. So we have some information that will help you as you read through our responses and also prepare to have conversations with OSEP prior to you submitting your clarified SPP APR. So with that, I will turn the call over to Jennifer Simpson, who is leading our grant application process. Jennifer?
Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon, everyone. As Greg said, I'm Jennifer Simpson. I'm the facilitator for the program implementation team, which is the group in OSEP responsible for the formula grant process. And I'm joined today by Kala Shah Supernat. She's senior counsel with the Office of General Counsel. And she is with me today so that she can respond to any questions you may have related to the GEPA Section 427 requirement and subgranting. Next slide. So as you know, Greg Core sent an email out to all states on March 27th with some additional guidance related to the grant requirements, and in particular, GEPA Section 427 and subgranting. During the national TA call that we conducted to share the grant application packages, we shared information then about how states were to implement the GEPA Section 427 requirement with subgrantees. And after that call, received a number of questions for additional information about how to do that. So Greg's email provided some additional instructions, and we just want to go over those today and see if there are any remaining questions. So in that email, Greg emphasized the following: that SEAs and LEAs that subgrant must ensure that those subgrantees submit applications to the states, and with those applications for funds under an applicable ed program, which IDA would be one of those programs, those subgrantees must also include a description sufficient to meet the GEPA Section 427 requirement. And so subgrantees are complying with Section 427 when they submit a new application, and new applications would be those submitted after February 24th of this year, so February 24th, 2023. And if that application also contains a form or a description that meets the statutory requirements of GEPA Section 427. Now with that, and in that email from Greg, we extended 3 possible options to demonstrate the flexibility that you have as a SEA or a lead agency that subgrants with regards to having your subgrantees meet that GEPA Section 427 requirement. Next slide. The 3 options we presented were the following. 1, you could require your subgrantees to use and submit the new GEPA form. So that was the new GEPA Section 427 form that we shared during the TA call on the application process. And that form is also housed on our website for your use. Or you could require subgrantees to use and submit their previously approved GEPA 427 description. So that means when these subgrantees are submitting their applications to you for this year, they would also include with that application another submission, okay? And that submission of the previously approved form does not expire, okay? So if it's a form that was created before we made available the new GEPA form, that's okay. Subgrantees can use that document for the purposes of meeting the GEPA Section 427 requirement. Or the third option would be you could allow your subgrantees to submit their own descriptions or form that is sufficient to meet the requirements of GEPA Section 427. So 3 possible ways here that were expressed in that email that Greg sent for you to ensure that your subgrantees meet the requirements under GEPA Section 427. Next slide. So the bottom line here is that states do not have to use the new GEPA Section 427 form with their subgrantee applications this year. And in fact, you may decide that you want to wait. So you may make a decision that you'll use a new form in future years so that you can make sure that the barriers and strategies and timelines that you've outlined in your state form can also be addressed at the local level with the forms that your subgrantees will submit in the future. Okay, so by waiting until next year to roll out the new form with your subgrantees, you can then ensure that you have that alignment between the state form, and you can also remove the burden that you may be experiencing right now with trying to get those subgrantees acclimated to the new form. So instead, they can submit their subgrantee applications to the state this year by using their previously approved GEPA form or GEPA description. Next slide. Okay, that was it, very quick. Just summarizing what was in Greg's email. However, we wanted to use this opportunity to respond to any questions you might have related to GEPA and subgranting. So we will check the Q&A to see if there are questions there. And certainly if something comes up after today, you can also send those questions to me, and I've included my email address here for your use. So in looking at the Q&A, I see we have one that's related to the timeline for releasing an interactive spreadsheet. And I can just confirm for you that that is a high priority item for us. I see Carla wants to say something about this. So Carla, if you want to add more, you can go right ahead.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm Carla Shaw, Superintendent in the Office of General Counsel. Among the hats I wear here at the Department of Education is the team lead for the IDA program. Jennifer Simpson and I have worked together on IDA grant issues for many years, and we anticipate that it may be towards the end of next month that we will be able to release the interactive spreadsheet and grant award amounts. We are working with our budget office, but we'll make them available as soon as we can. So thank you for that question. We do have a few questions also with regard to GEPA Section 427. Some questions we received actually before today's call, so we wanted to make sure to address those questions as well. I'll go through the questions in the chat first and then address the questions that we received previously. Just a reminder, there are 2 requirements under GEPA Section 427. The first is that the state, as Jennifer mentioned, needs to submit the new GEPA Section 427 form that has been updated by the department and now approved by OMB as part of this year's grant cycle. That was one of the questions in the chat is the GEPA form, the new GEPA form, a requirement for the federal fiscal year 2023-24 IDA grant? It is for us as the federal program, the Office of Special Education Programs needs to receive that form. And that form should be out now for public comment with your state. We have taken a look, and it looks like the vast majority of states have put out their updated new GEPA Section 427 forms out for public comment as part of the public participation requirements under Part B in 300-165B and Part C under 303-208A. So we thank you for that. For those few that have not yet had an opportunity to do so, please make sure you do so. And if you have any questions about that, please do reach out to Jennifer Simpson. With respect to the second requirement, which is where we did receive a number of questions with respect to the subgrantee applications, we received questions about whether that is a retroactive requirement. So as Jennifer indicated, these would be the GEPA 427 has been a requirement. It's a longstanding requirement. With any new subgranting application submitted after February 24th of this year, whether they are submitted before July 1, 2023 or after July 1, 2023, the state agency must ensure that the subgrantee has submitted a description. It cannot rely on a previous submission in the sense that it can't just refer back to it. It has to submit it with the application itself. Does the SCA or lead agency expected to review and approve that form that's submitted by LEAs? Generally, yes. I mean, it's a description that's part of the application requirement for subgrantees. It's not something that you'll see very formal. I don't anticipate that we, the Department of Education or Office of Special Education Programs, will formally approve in your grant letter the updated GEPA 427 form. We will acknowledge it perhaps. And if there are any issues with it, we will certainly contact you, including the public participation. There was this question about the eligibility for LEAs for 2023-24. Is the GEPA form an eligibility requirement? It is an application requirement under the General Education Provisions Act, which applies to our grantees and our subgrantees. There was a question in the chat regarding whether other education-funded programs, such as ESSA, will be required to use the new GEPA Section 427 form. The GEPA Section 427 form will apply to all state formula grants that are administered by the U.S. Department of Education and other applicable programs. That includes our discretionary grants as we receive new applications under those grant programs. As you may know, under ESSA, for example, for Title I, unlike IDA, we do not receive annual applications. So it's whenever that new application is submitted that the updated description using the new GEPA form will be required. Fortunately for you all in the IDA space, you guys are the first state formula grantees that get to submit that as state educational agencies and state lead agencies. So you're kind of our first, guinea pigs or folks who are using the new form as your state formula grant applications are due first. And that's going to be due May 24th of this year. Right, Jennifer? There was a question. Yeah, there's a question about GEPA Section 427 and when it was initially created. That was back in the 1990s, 1994. It's been a longstanding requirement in the application. It's identified in Section 2A of the Part C application. And in general, for many years, if a state had a description on file, they did not need to update it. What will change going forward is that you will be expected to look at it because the new form includes 4 questions to look at your barriers in 6 areas to identify not just the barriers, the strategies, but also timelines to implement strategies. And so you'll have to look at your form each year to see if you need to update it. With respect to the subgranting questions that we received, we also were asked whether whether a state could submit a combined, it's an unusual question, combined Part B and Part C GEPA Section 427 form. It could be combined, but please make clear which sections would apply to the Part C population and which would apply to the Part B population in terms of the barriers that are identified, the strategies and timelines. I think that's all we have from the chat. There was a question about timing if LEAs submit subgranting applications, but they're not approved until after June 30th. That's fine. There's no anticipation that you would change your approval cycle, but just to note that when that application, subgranting application is approved, it would be, it would include that updated, not updated, but some GEPA Section 427 description from all your subgrantees. It does not need to use the updated form. Seeing more questions in the chat. There's a question about whether is it correct that the GEPA requirements for subgrantees is applicable for those Part C states that are subgranting and not those states that are using contracts. That is correct. GEPA Section 427 applies to the U.S. Department of Education's grantees and subgrantees. So for those states that are using contracts as their vehicles, this would not apply with respect to the subgranting piece.
And Carla, let me just clarify something related to the allocations. We had a leadership team meeting today within MSEP, so we feel confident that we should have that allocation information available no later than the end of April. As opposed
Thank you
to
for
the
that
end of May.
clarification, Jennifer.
So I know that we raised your anxiety level by mentioning May, but no, we hope to have it out the door no later than the end of April. We're shooting for sometime next week, but at the very latest, it would be the end of April. Can you say this again, what Jennifer just said? The allocation table information should be out the door from OSEP no later than the end of April. Okay, I don't see anything else.
Yep, I am not seeing any other questions, just going once, just going twice. Thank you for the applause. I'm thankfully not on the screen, so the applause can go to all the whole team. I think with that, we are ready to move on to the next topic, Jennifer.
All right, thank you so much. I'm now going to pass the presentation on to Christine Pilgrim.
Thanks, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. I'm a little apprehensive coming after Jennifer Simpson and Kala, as they're all dressed very professionally. There is a reason I am talking to you with a t-shirt on. It's because my daughter is competing in regional championships just across the street from this venue. So I had to drop her off really quick and have all my gear to cheer her on and run back to do this call and then go back there. So apologies, I'm not as well dressed as I typically would be for our time together, but nonetheless, here we are. So as is to all, thanks for the reactions. As is typical, you know, some days being a parent and working full time is very stressful, but I'm preaching to the choir. But as is typically sort of our cadence, the week we issue clarification, we have a clarification national TA call, and it's our opportunity to give you some reminders that are logistic in nature, talk through any maybe language that you might be seeing or changes. Like last year, it was a lot around the new measurement table, et cetera. And this is that typical conversation that we tend to have. I do want to say one thing that I recently became aware of, so I want to flag it for my Part C friends. And that is that when you got emails signaling that the system was open, there was an attachment for the clarification tips, and it was for the wrong year. It says FFY 2020 on it. And I have asked AEM to please rectify that and send out the new one, the current one, to you. So just hang on tight, and that'll be coming shortly. I'm pleased today to have folks from my data implementation team on as well to share this stage with me. I figured that y'all are a little tired of hearing my voice, so we need to spice it up a little bit, and you can hear some other folks. So I am pleased to introduce them as well. And in addition to the logistics, like I said, we just want to talk through some language that you might be seeing in OSEP response and be able to flag that for you. So I'm going to turn it over to Shannon, who's going to start the ball rolling. After we hear from Shannon and Jeanette, I'll sort of summarize that little piece at the end. And then the last bit of our time together is going to be very Part B centered around B4. So just want to flag that for you. But with that, I am gonna turn it over to Shannon. Oh, one more thing I did want to say. I was thinking today when I was all stressed out, Part B clarification, have to get it out the door, that I hope that you guys realize how surrounded you are by support. Not only the support of OSEP, your OSEP state leads, but the incredible TA centers, our OSEP investments, who sit there well poised and ready to help you and support you through the clarification process and beyond. So I just hope that you feel, supported and well cared for at stressful times like this. But with that, I'll turn it over to Shannon.
All right, thank you, Christine. And Shoshana, if you want to go to the next slide. Here is a quick look at our agenda. We will cover the first two items fairly quickly so that we have more time to discuss the actual OSEP responses. As I know has already been said, if you have questions as we go, please do enter them into the Q&A. Our team will work behind the scenes to try to answer as many as we can. But knowing that we have a very condensed amount of time, if we do not get to all of your questions, we will follow up with you individually. So that is how today will go. So next slide. All right. So this slide is important for the purposes of the dates that are included for this year's clarification period. So as Christine and I believe Greg mentioned in the beginning, Part C states SPP APRs with OSEP responses were released earlier this week. Part B states will be available today, hopefully, fingers crossed. And it is important that we pay attention to the end dates of the clarification period, as that's the deadline for making any changes. And we'll talk about what that entails in a few slides. So next slide. Okay. So how to review OSEP responses and basically how to get support from OSEP. So when reviewing OSEP responses, it is important to look at all of the language within each of the indicators. As you have questions or as you need clarification or you just want to ask or comment on something, it's recommended that you make note of that to be able to talk to your state lead during your clarification call, should you choose to have one. So clarification calls, as you know, are optional. We do recommend them, but they are optional. You may also find it helpful to invite other team members who are involved in the data collection and analysis process for the SPP APR. This includes your TA providers, and I know Christine just talked about all of the support that can be available, but the TA providers can assist you with reviewing the responses, asking the questions on the call, and then following the call, they'll be able to assist you with clarifying anything that needs to be clarified. One last point about the clarification calls, if you choose to have one, it may be helpful to send your questions to your state lead in advance. This helps them be better prepared, and if they need to call on another OSEP staff member, they'll be able to do that in advance or have them attend the call if that is the preferred method. So as you get your SPP APRs, take a look at it, and if there are very unique questions or things that you'd feel like might require a little bit more, then feel free to reach out to your state lead in advance with those questions. And next slide. So this is just a quick reminder about the dispute resolution data. The resubmission period for dispute resolution opens on May 1st and it closes on May 24th. So if you are in need of resubmitting your data, then that is the time period to do so. Next slide. Here are a few Part B reminders. So if you resubmitted assessment data after the December date, you should see that in the clarification APR that will be coming back to you. OSEP has not seen that data yet. It will refresh for us after you submit your second submission of the APR. Additionally, one of the common errors we found this year in several state SPP APRs was around entering letters into an integer-only field. So for example, and this is just one example, in the baseline data table, that field only will accept numbers. So if you put in letters such as FFY, so if you're putting in the year and you put that the letters FFY before 2021 or 2020, it's going to impact the rest of the fields on that table. So for example, if it's the assessment table and you're putting in FFY 2020 as the baseline, because that's not recognized in that field, it won't allow, it won't populate the slippage and the status boxes within that table. So just a little thing to remember is really kind of paying attention to some of those integer only fields. Next slide. Okay, so part of clarification this period is it gives you an opportunity to make those changes based on OSEP responses should you choose to. So there is a clarification change form that is part of this process. The form can be accessed through the Community of Practice website, which is formerly known as Grads 360. It should also come from PSC when they do send you the email letting you know that the system is open. On that form, you'll want to ensure that all of the revisions that you're making within EMAPS, within the SPP APR itself, are also reflected on that change form. This is important as OSEP tracks any and all changes between the SPP APR submissions, so making sure that we're able to identify what the state has changed and exactly where it is. So when completing the form, the changes should be listed by indicator, and we'll show you an example of that on the next slide if you haven't seen this before, so I know many of you are familiar with this form. The third box here shows you the preferred naming convention when attaching the clarification change form in EMAPS. Again, this helps us quickly identify the form in the system, especially if there's multiple attachments related to your submission. So just making sure that it's clearly labeled when it is attached. So now we'll take a quick look at an example of a clarification change form. So next slide right here. So here you'll see the items that we just discussed. You don't need to go into too many details for each change. So we don't want you to put everything that is being changed. Just give a quick summary that's clear enough to signal to the state lead what changes have been made within the submission. So you can edit the form. It's a Word document. So if you need more boxes, you are welcome to continue adding boxes based on what you decide to do with your resubmission. And a final note about the clarification change form, because we know that our documents have to be 508 compliant. The clarification change form is not a publicly posted form, so you don't need to worry about the 508 compliance for this one in particular. Okay, next slide. All right, so lastly, before we get into the OSEP responses, I do just want to give another final reminder about the resubmission deadlines for clarification changes. So you'll see them here. For Part C, it is April 25th, and for Part B, it is April 27th. So again, thinking about when you're scheduling or requesting to schedule those clarification calls with your state lead, ensuring that you give yourself enough time to be able to make some changes before this resubmission deadline. And remember, if you choose to provide additional information as a result of the OSEP responses, please be sure again to update the actual SPP APR in the system as well as the clarification change form. So just, I know we've said it a couple of times, but really want to make sure that those pieces are completed. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jeanette, who will talk to you about the FFY 2021 OSEP responses.
Thank you, Shannon. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, we're going to go through, I'm going to take you through some of the OSEP responses you might see based on some of our reviews. So let's start with the first one. Next slide, please. This is really fairly straightforward. This is about the Part C ICC forms. Part C states no from the PSC broadcast that went out a few weeks ago that there was an incorrect ICC form posted initially. You'll see here that there were 3 dates that could potentially be incorrect. In the first paragraph and in the footer, it references the date that this APR was due. So it should be February 1st, 2023. On some forms, we're seeing that one or both of those dates is February 1st, 2022. And then in statement number 2, it should reflect the current reporting FFY, which is FFY 2021. And so the 2023 ICC form with all 3 correct dates has been posted. If you originally submitted a form that had any one of these 3 dates incorrect, you'll see a response asking you to submit a 2023 form, and just want to remind you that any resubmitted form still must have a valid signature, whether that's a wet signature or a digital signature, but it cannot be just a typed name there. Next slide, please. So the next couple of slides, I want to highlight indicators that OSEP is asking for a little more explanation or clarification around. So beginning with child outcomes and indicators C3 and B7, we are taking a closer look at the reported number of infants and toddlers with IFSPs or 3 to 5-year-old preschoolers with IEPs that were assessed, and those summary statement 2 denominators for each of the 3 outcomes. We would expect that the summary statement 2 denominators represent the total number of children assessed. And so when we see those numbers reported differently, it just leads us to needing more information about why that is. So there were actually 3 ways those numbers could be called into question. First, if the total number assessed just wasn't reported at all. Second, if the 3 denominators all match, but they don't match the total number reported assessed. And third, if there's just some inconsistencies across all 4 of those numbers. So you might see some language asking for some additional information there. Briefly, reasons for delay in Part C compliance indicators 1, 7, 8A, B, and C. As you know, states have the option of including the number of delays that were the result of exceptional family circumstances. However, if you do include those, and if you only provide information related to exceptional family circumstances delays and fail to include the other reasons for delays that are not attributable to exceptional family circumstances, then you've not met the requirements. And we can't tell if the state has looked at those other non-exceptional family circumstance reasons for delay. And so we might be asking for more information around that. All right, OSEP, the State Systemic Improvement Plan. During our internal reviews, and then also noted from our TA centers, we noticed there might be some confusion about the state using a subset of the population from the indicator. And so the reporting platform requires the state to report yes or no if you're using a subset. And if you report you're not using a subset, and then during our reviews, we see language that indicates it could be a subset. So things such as measuring graduation rates specifically for Native American students, or referencing pilot sites or OSEP schools. Though that gives us pause and makes us wonder if it really is in fact a subset that's being measured. We do understand that some of that language might just be referring to for example, scaling up of a specific evidence-based practice, and not necessarily about the data source. So then we take it another step further and we kind of cross-check that OSEP data with the associated indicator data, if that's applicable and appropriate. And if it's the same, then we know it's not a subset. If it's different, or there's some variations, or it's not clear, you might see some language asking again for some more information around that. Next slide, please. So stakeholder engagement. We are continuing to emphasize the importance of states building the capacity of diverse groups of parents, not just increasing the number of those diverse parents involved. And so we really want to emphasize engaging in technical assistance with your state lead and or with our TA centers for support in thinking about what this means and how to do it, and reminding everyone that the focus needs to be on increasing diverse groups of parents' ability or capacity to really be active, informed participants in your processes. Whether it's setting targets or decision-making around programming, all of those things, rather than just being passive recipients of the information and asking to get feedback from them. And looking at non-response bias versus representativeness, as in indicators C4, B8, and B14. When we're looking at non-response bias, we are analyzing the impact of who did not respond as it relates to the data collected. For example, is there a difference in the responses received early in the survey collection versus later regarding satisfaction with parent involvement? Is one way to be looking at non-response bias. And for representativeness, we're looking at the extent to which the data represents the total population as it's identified in C4, B4, B8, and B14. And so states need to be really providing sufficient information that allows OSEP to understand how the representativeness was actually determined. And then finally, sampling plans. All states who use a sampling method for indicators C3, C4, B7, B8, and or B14 last year were required to submit their sampling plans, and just want to flag that states are in various stages of this review, feedback, and revisions process, and really fall into basically 5 kind of buckets of categories. And so one is those states that submitted, we've reviewed and approved that sampling plan without any needing any feedback or revisions. There's a group that have submitted, they've received feedback back from us, and are in the process of making those revisions, but haven't resubmitted yet. There's that group of states that have resubmitted and are awaiting that next level of review and feedback. The fourth one are those states that have just submitted but haven't received any initial round of feedback. And then there are some states that are still needing to submit their sampling plans. And so OSEP responses have been tailored to each of those different scenarios specific to each state, which should give you clear direction on what you need to do and what to talk about with your state lead. And so with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Christine.
Yeah, whoever turned on their camera, right? Before we talk about indicator 4, and Kim is going to come on and lead us through that discussion, I just wanted to flag there was a question in the chat about, and I'll just say it out loud for everyone's benefit, if a state addresses whatever issue OSEP may have found in an indicator, would they get the point back on the data rubric? And yes, if, let's say, OSEP decided that your data are not valid or reliable based on our analysis, and there was some inconsistency with the measurement table, during clarification, if you're able to address it, you will get the point back. Yes. Clarification period is an incredible opportunity, an incredible 2-week opportunity to clarify things, right? We've given you our initial analysis, and based on what we've read, this is sort of what OSEP is saying and how we're responding to different pieces. But now you have the opportunity to address that and clear it up. Before turning over to Kim, I will just flag, I was thinking about anything else, like we've hit like the really big ticket items that may end up in OSEP response and language that affects a number of states. But I was thinking about if there was anything else that has come up that would be pertinent for you to know. And I think the only other thing, so, we talked about the ICC form and the fact that it was posted wrong, but Part C programs knew upfront, at least 2 weeks ago, so you could get a head start on it so that you can have it ready to resubmit. So there might be language about that in the introduction. There could be language around stakeholder engagement, as we mentioned. Jeanette flagged that we were really taking a look at that piece about the description to build the capacity of diverse groups of parents. So some people may have that language, some may not. States with outstanding findings from sort of the last bit of DMS 1.0, so that would be around like FFY 19. There might be language in there speaking about the status of that, sort of like when we issued the letter, what you may have submitted to us, and where we are in that process. So just laying out where we are there. And then, as Jeanette mentioned, representativeness. She touched on the OSEP. Sampling plans are a biggie, though. So I know that we had quite a bit of energy and discussion about that last year for all the states that were sampling, and states have all gotten a round of feedback from us on the sampling plans. And it's really important that we keep that communication going so that we can get those to approval statuses. So that language is also in there. So you're just going to want to make sure that you attend to that. The other thing I wanted to say before Kim started is, last October when we had our TA call, we talked a little bit again about the importance, it's a real priority of the administration, sort of discipline practices for kids with disabilities, as evidenced by the issuance of our discipline package. And in October, I flagged for you that the SPP APR instructions had language in there about OSEP determining reasonableness of states' methodologies and some of the things that we might consider. So we have spent an incredible amount of time and hours analyzing state submissions this year to make sure that we fully understand your methodologies and thinking about the reasonableness piece, et cetera. And through that sort of intense scrutiny, as a result of this being a priority, we have questions in some places or we need clarification in others. And I know for some of you, when you look at your OSEP response, you might think, oh my gosh, well, we've said this for years, and likely, but we have really looked at it with quite a laser focus this year and really view this as an opportunity, because ultimately we're all working towards the same end, I am sure, which is to make sure that we support you in having methodologies that are well designed to make sure that you're, flagging districts for significant discrepancies. So remember, the same end game is in mind for both of us. But I'll turn it over to Kim to talk a little bit more in depth about some of the OSEP response that folks may see. And I know for Part C folks, I don't know if at this point, if you're multitasking or if you have to hop off because, it's late in the day, but please don't hesitate to reach out to us if there are any questions, et cetera, or drop them in the chat. But Kim, all yours.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Christine. And thank you all for sticking with us to have this conversation about indicator 4A and 4B. So I'm excited to share with you a little bit of information about what's new this year, what you can expect for when you review your OSEP responses in your APR for this year. And then, of course, we want to be able to connect you with support to address some of the issues that were raised in the responses. So we can go to the next slide, please. Perfect, thanks. So first, to orient ourselves a little bit, and Christine just really mentioned some of this, as you know, reducing exclusionary discipline practices is a priority for the administration. And again, as Christine mentioned, last July, OSEP released a very comprehensive guidance package on IDEA's discipline requirements. And that guidance package consisted of 3 documents: a Dear Colleague letter from OSEP Director Valerie Williams, a questions and answers document aligned to IDEA's discipline and behavior requirements, and then the third document, a technical assistance guide to really highlight some preventative approaches and practices that can really support the behavioral needs of children with disabilities so that we can reduce the reliance on exclusionary discipline. And so, of course, there were many issues addressed in the guidance package, but there's one that we wanted to focus on today. And that is the issue in section L of the questions and answers document, which is that a set of questions that address the topic of state oversight and data reporting responsibilities. So directly relevant to indicator 4A and 4B in the SPP APR is question L6. And we included it here just so you could have it as reference. But really kind of to paraphrase the question and the answer, what this Q&A did, this question did, was that it really informed all stakeholders that a state's methodology for determining significant discrepancies in the rate of long-term suspensions and expulsions for children with disabilities must be reasonably designed. And so, this is something that we thought long and hard about and included some additional factors that OSEP might consider when thinking about what does it mean to have a reasonably designed methodology. And so the factors that are listed in the answer to question L6 were the following 3 potential factors. One, looking at whether a state's methodology resulted in none of its LEAs being included in its analysis. 2, whether a small percentage of LEAs were included in the state's analysis. And then the third factor that we said OSEP might consider when looking at reasonableness was whether statistically sound alternative methodologies exist or are being used by similarly situated states. And so those were really the 3 factors that we had said OSEP may consider when looking at thinking about whether a state's methodology is reasonable. And so as Christine mentioned, OSEP staff flagged this for you on a national TA call last fall when we talked about the discipline guidance. And then again, we flagged it during the, we included it in the FFY 2021 SPP APR instructions. And so while this is certainly not the first time, hopefully, that you're hearing this information, how OSEP has started to operationalize this is new. And so that's really what we wanted to share with you today. So next slide, please. Perfect, thank you. So for all the reasons I just shared and Christine shared, this year we took a very close look at each state's 4A and 4B submission. And I will say that almost every state received some type of OSEP response. And so we wanted to really kind of explain to you what those responses look like. So in addition to really the typical ways that we have reviewed indicator 4A and 4B, our analysis this year also looked closely at reviewing each state's methodology and calculation. And then also we looked at how we considered whether the state's methodology is reasonably designed to identify LEAs as having a significant discrepancy. And so through this analysis, we have identified instances where the information that is provided is not aligned with the measurement table. And in these circumstances, you'll see an OSEP response of not valid and reliable. But we've also highlighted issues that OSEP felt were important to flag for states to pay attention to, really related to the reasonableness of a state's methodology. And these issues received a more general OSEP response. And so I really wanted to make sure that we directly address that we fully understand that most, if not all states, had the rates of suspensions and expulsions was lower in this reporting period because the data in indicator 4A and 4B is lag data. And so it covers school year, the 2020-2021 school year. And as we all know, that school year was impacted by COVID. Many states were continuing virtual learning. So where states have noted this impact in their narrative, the impact of COVID on having fewer discipline or long-term suspensions and expulsions, you'll see that also echoed in OSEP's response to really further acknowledge the fact that we recognize the impact that COVID had on decreased discipline rates. So I just wanted to flag that for you. But all of that said, we're really looking deeply at the design of a methodology as an exercise that can be done now. And so we do hope that you'll view OSEP's response in the same way we are, as Christine mentioned, really as an opportunity to consider how a state's methodology can be designed to really meaningfully examine whether significant discrepancies are occurring within LEAs. And so, that policies, practices, procedures, and all of that we can really work towards improvement. And so with that, I want to, we can review some of the common issues that we identified during the process. Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. So through this review, as Christine said, we really took a very in-depth look at what every state was reporting to us in indicator 4A and 4B. And we did address, we did identify some common themes, and you'll see them here on this screen, and we kind of categorize them into these two areas. The first area that I'll talk about is really looking at some of the issues we identified regarding the methodology itself as it relates to the calculation. And so, one of the themes that we saw was that many states are not using one of the two comparison methods that originate from the IDEA statute and the regulations, of course, but also are included in the measurement table. So those two comparisons that are required, using one of those two comparisons that are required. Another theme that we saw was that many states do not directly address race and ethnicity in indicator 4B. Third, we saw that there are many states that use different thresholds to determine whether there's a significant discrepancy by race. That was another kind of theme that we saw. And then lastly, of course, we really continue to see some of the much more typical responses that we see an indicator 4, or really across the indicators, where sometimes we see an inconsistency between the data and the narrative. And so, where any of those themes or topics were observed within a state's 4A or 4B submission, you'll see that there was an OSEP response of not valid and reliable in some cases, and in other cases, a more general OSEP response. So going forward to the next set of themes, so that kind of next group, just one slide. There we go. It's just the second kind of group at the bottom of the slide. We wanted to really kind of identify some of the topics related to reasonableness that we observed through some of the all the submissions. And so we observed three themes that we commented on. The first was that many states just don't provide OSEP with all of the information we need to really fully understand a state's methodology. And so in those circumstances, you'll see that we are requesting some specific types of information to be provided, just to enable us to really fully understand the methodology that you're using. The second theme that we saw in this kind of reasonableness category was really looking at whether states are including none of their LEAs or including a very small percentage of their LEAs in their analysis. And in these circumstances, you'll see that we included an OSEP response there as well. Again, recognizing that, that many states did not have the same types of discipline rates that they've had in previous years due to virtual learning and all that, but we are just flagging that, that it's something that we have noticed. And then the third area that we, and the theme that we saw and that we commented on was that many states set a higher threshold to show whether significant discrepancies are occurring when compared to all states. And so these thresholds or rate ratios that states reported really ranged from 1.5 times the comparison group to 227 times the comparison group. And so for states that fell on the higher end of that threshold, you'll see that we issued an OSEP response. So for this cluster of issues, you'll notice that the OSEP responses are not NVR, but they are really intended to inform states that these are areas that OSEP is focusing on, that we're paying attention to, and that we are looking at in terms of thinking about the reasonableness of a state's methodology. So now we can go to the next slide. Perfect, thanks. So a few thoughts for next steps as you kind of, digest and read the OSEP comments that have come back to you in the APR. You'll notice that, some of these issues, as Christine said, really can be addressed during a 2-week clarification period, while other issues are going to require a longer time to properly address. And so, of course, during this time of clarification, we really encourage you to, inform your state lead if this is a topic that you want to talk about in depth on your clarification call, because that will enable us to, fully prepare for that conversation. We want to be able to support you, and especially, where the responses are new or, haven't been seen previously. We want to be able to support you in fully understanding what those responses are, what they mean, why you receive them, and really think about and brainstorm with you, where do we see the misalignment with the measurement table. And we want to be able to provide those conversations to make them as productive as possible. So if you do want to have them, which I encourage you to do, if you do want to have them, please give your state lead a heads up, shoot them an email and just tell them that this is a topic you would like to discuss. If you have any specific questions that you want to submit ahead of time, as Shannon said earlier, that really does help us prepare in order to have a productive conversation with you in, the short time that we have together. So any questions that you have ahead of time that you want to discuss with us or really understand more, encourage you to, write those in an email and send them to your state lead so we can make sure that we address them as, to give you the tools that you need to address them as well. So, I know this, a lot of this originated out of the discipline guidance, and that was new. And so, this is a new way and a new opportunity, as Christine said, for us to really take a fresh look, and for you all to take a fresh look at how your state is really determining whether significant discrepancies in long-term suspensions and expulsions do exist for kids with disabilities. And this is really a time for us to think about, maybe some of these practices or approaches haven't been changed in a while, and maybe this is a time to rethink that. So we wanted, of course, to flag for you that we want to provide that ongoing support for you. And one more slide for me, and then I'll turn it back to Christine. So as always, of course, we encourage you to, as Christine mentioned, to, use the wonderful resources that we have available to you through the OSEP funded technical assistance centers, whether it's ECTA or DAISY or IDC or NCSI. they can all provide you with really good information and guidance and brainstorming and opportunities to really discuss this topic in further detail, not just indicator 4A and 4B, of course, but all areas that they work on, but would really encourage you to reach out to them and, start that conversation as early as possible so that you can be best prepared to, address the issues that are highlighted in the APR response. But with that, I will turn it back to Christine to close us out.
Thanks so much, Kim. I am going to echo what Kim just mentioned before. Here's a little resource slide, and these are things that you've seen already in EMAPS. Please don't forget that if there's any sort of tech issue like in EMAPS, or you're having concerns about usernames, passwords, any of those other things, any sort of technologically related issue, please reach out to PSC. And if there's something they have to pull the program office into, they will let us know. But in thinking about our OSEP funded centers, I know that the individuals working in those spaces are already thinking about the myriad of ways that they can support you during clarification and beyond. So please do not hesitate to reach out to them if you have questions about what you're seeing in OSEP response, et cetera. They are there for you. And I encourage you to have them on your clarification calls as well. It's always nice to have a set of ears that may not be mired in the work all of the time, and they can support and guide you in this. So with that, I will say we appreciate all of your hard work. We know that you work furiously over the 2-week period to turn around those responses and get them back into us. I do want to also remind you that when you look at your data rubrics, if you have any concerns about how the 618 portion of that rubric is scored, so that's timeliness, accuracy, and completeness, on your 618 collections, that you would be, writing PSC to let them know, and they will funnel that to us. But to echo everything my colleagues have said, you are well supported. Please do not hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Clarification is a 2-week period. You don't get one sort of bite at the apple. There's no quota of you have one clarification call and that is it. I know that the OSEP state leads will be able to circle back with you and are willing to talk to you more than once if you want to talk through anything. If there are very specific, complex, weedy questions that you have, please let them know ahead of time. Send them in writing if you can, so that we can make sure that the right folks are on the call to support. And with that, I want to thank Jennifer Simpson and my colleague Jennifer Simpson, and also Kala Shah Supernat, our colleague in the Office of General Counsel, for sharing this 1-hour time with us. I need to go see my daughter compete, if that is okay with you. If anything, I think there's one question in the chat, just looking at it. So I'm trying to read it quickly. Yes, not a question, but more of a comment in terms of looking ahead, what we may see as folks are returning to in-person learning, its lag data, those comparisons, how those numbers could look. But, as we have noted, we know that some of the issues, that exist that are affecting the data. And this is all an opportunity to tell your story within that, but also to make sure that your methodology, without all of that sort of noise of a pandemic and everything else, is reasonably designed to deal with what it needs to deal with. But I appreciate your grace. Thank you so much. Please let me go watch my baby compete. And thank you, Kala. I'm sure signed on to say bye, but please be well and don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions. Greg, I don't know if you want to say the last bye, or if we can I can run out of this hotel room. Hearing nothing from my division director. Have a great day, everyone. Many of you know how to find me. Bye-bye.
Go see your baby.